or bust, right? And I meant that financially, spiritually, emotionally. And there's just a lot of days that I have 10% and I need him to be 90. There's days I don't have and I need him to be 100. It's a trauma response. And 50-50 is I'm not going to be vulnerable enough to trust you with 100% of anything, not my heart, not my cash. And when I started to really address that, and I was like, do you want to pay whole mortgage? I thought I was about to die. I had such anxiety. Like I was crying, I was shaking. And he was like, you insisted on that. He's like, I thought it made you feel better. I'm like, it did. And right now I want to take it back. Now it sounds crazy to be like, you, Mr. NBA superstar who made a bazillion more amount of money than I do, can pay the mortgage, because I hate the feeling of releasing that to someone. And you release that to someone, chaos can happen. And it's brought us closer, because he knows it's not about whether he can afford it. It's being vulnerable enough to be open enough to know that I'm okay. I'm okay as his wife. He's okay as my husband. I'm okay in this family. I'm okay in this home. I deserve it. And so I'm trying to expand my heart, expand all of the notions of what vulnerability can look like.
As you heal, as you evolve, as you lean more into vulnerability, you can also change how you feel about something. And it's
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black Button 91. I spoke about this particular video a couple of last year when she dropped this on, I think it's Club Shay Shay, was she talking about this? And I spoke about attachment styles as well and how it affects you in the way that you move. Like Gabrielle Union is a typical person who is hyper independent. The way that she talks, the way she moves, the way she describes her situation, she is hyper independent. And so the fact that she's now getting to a place where she no longer wants to be 50-50 and she's able to release herself from that is actually a release of power. So the lack of vulnerability that she showed in the relationship previously was actually her holding on to power. It wasn't anything about Dwayne Wade per se that he was doing wrong, simply being that Gabrielle Union did not want to give up power, because people have an avoidant attachment. What their biggest fear is that they'll be rejected, number one. Number two, they won't have the support or the encouragement of people. Number three, they'll be let down and disappointed. Number four, they believe that also as well, that if they give up room or power and be vulnerable, it will be used against them. And because they've experienced emotional neglect from childhood and they've had to grow up faster than most people, where they've had to find their own solutions to issues, they become hyper independent. If you have to solve issues from a very young age, you are going to be self-reliant and realize that there's no one else who can do it for me. Only I can do it. Only I have my own back. And so when you go into relationships, you are still being hyper independent. That's what we saw from Gabrielle Union about a year ago. Now to see her transformed in this particular space is amazing. It's great. It's wonderful, because this is the healing work that one needs to do. And that's just is why I always say that when I'm coaching people, this is exactly what we're trying to do. It's not about Dwayne Wade changing. See, it's not about asking Dwayne Wade to pay all the bills. It is about her particular mindset needing to shift and needing to move. When she moves, the relationship will shift. This is why you need to do work with you first. Stop thinking about them and think about you. Now, going back to her video, she said that chaos would reign if she gave over the reins. Pun intended. So in that space, what does she actually mean? What she really means is, I can't trust you to take over. And that doesn't have to be because Dwayne Wade is not a good leader. That doesn't have to be because Dwayne Wade does anything wrong. It's simply because that makes her feel safe. For her, giving over the reins means that she no longer has control. And this avoidant technique of having control in every circumstances is about protecting yourself from feeling what you felt as a child, which was no control and rejection all over the place. Now I've gone a little bit fast here because I've gone ahead of the horses, as they say, right? I put a cart before the horse. And I want to just go back a little bit. I said about attachments and I said about avoidant attachments. What you must understand first and foremost, this is a theory in psychology that was done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. John Bowlby first, who developed three attachment styles based on children experiments with their caregivers. And what he realized was there were children who were secure, children who were anxious, and children that were avoidant. But then Mary Ainsworth came up a little bit later on and built upon that and found out as a fourth one, which is what we call dysfunctional, disorganized, or fearful avoidant. And what this essentially means is, how do you connect? How do you attach yourselves in relationships? If you're secure, you're able to give love and receive love easily. So you're not going to have a problem if a man comes into your life, with like Gabrielle Union, and says, I want to pay your bills. You're not going to feel like, oh my God, if he pays my bills, I'm going to be stuck here. I'm going to feel powerless. I'm going to feel like he's going to take over. You're not going to have those sentiments because you understand the reciprocity of relationships. Your discernment's probably good as well in terms of the kind of person you're going to choose who's going to create and foster an environment of safety, and an environment that makes you feel safe and comforted and loved and cared for. Also, because you can give it and we receive it, right? You'll not see that as once they pay the bill, then I owe them. That's something that avoidants do. Avoidants believe that if you do something for them, then they owe you something. And I'll get into that in a second or two. So secure people are they're very well blessed because they've grown up in environments where they've been trusted with autonomy. They've also been taught as well how to be dependent. So they've learned this key aspect: interdependence. This is where other particular attachments haven't found out yet, because we got these insecure aspects about us, and interdependence is scary. So either we are anxious and overly dependent, or we are avoidance and we are hyper independent. You can be fearful avoidant and you're going to fluctuate between the two. You're going to be hot and cold. And so going on to now dealing with the other three attachments: anxious, dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant. Anxious people are overgivers. They give because they want to feel like they are worthy in a relationship. And that is also what contains half of what fearful avoidance are. Anxious people, right? Anxious people who believe that they have to earn everything. And so everything about them is clinging onto something because they're afraid of abandonment. Let's talk quickly about dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidance are people who are dismissive of their own emotional needs and believe that actions speak louder than emotions. And in fact, I ain't got time for emotions. They don't solve issues. Let's solve the problem. But the problem with dismissive avoidance is that they are hyper independent. They struggle to ask for help even when they're drowning. And I think that's where we see Gabrielle Union at. We see her struggling in that particular environment. We know her background. She came from a place where, she had seen also SV, sexual violence in some aspect, right? We know that family financial aspect was a big issue for her growing up as well. So there are multiple issues as to what was happening with her growing up. And that creates an environment where she may not have received the love that she required at that particular age. Okay, then we have fearful avoidance. Fearful avoidance in a space too are hot and cold. You have both anxious and avoidant traits. They want love, but they reject it when it comes their way because they're afraid of it, yet they want it. They're afraid of being abandoned, they're afraid of being rejected, and they're afraid of being betrayed. And so because of that, there's hot and cold. Now, let's go back to Gabrielle Union, okay, and what she was actually telling us about. In the beginning, she said to us about how she struggled with the idea of being 50-50. I mean, being anything more than 50-50.
Financially, spiritually, emotionally. And there's just a lot of days that I have 10% and I need him to be 90. There's days I don't have. And I need him to be 100. It's a trauma response. And 50-50 is, I'm not going to be vulnerable enough to trust you with 100% of anything, not my.
Let's pause it right there, because dismissive avoidance specifically, or let's just say avoidance in general, because we can do both dismissive and fearful avoidance carry this aspect where they can't trust people, right? In fact, dismissive avoidance have a very high esteem of themselves and low esteem of other people. They trust themselves, don't trust you. That's why they're hyper independent. Okay, so you'll notice that with dismissive people, they're very wary of other people. They observe people. They are critical. They're skeptical. They're always watching. They're withdrawn at certain points, right? And it's because they're angry. I'm going to tell you the honest truth, because if you look at the emotional wheel, see where withdrawn is, see where numb is, see where isolation is, you'll find out it's in the angry category. Why? Because dismissive avoidant people are angry. Gabrielle Union was angry. And the anger is not that it's explosive. There is implosive anger where you are angry and it causes you to move away. You have suffered at the hands of people. Maybe you're disappointed, but you're angry at the disappointment that you couldn't actually rely on anybody. And just because you're not rah-rah in everybody's face, it's called silent anger. The silent anger causes you to pull away from people. So when people hurt you, you are angry at the person who hurt you or they disappointed you. But rather than shouting at them and cussing out their name, you go and say, well, I don't need nobody. I'll cut people off quick. I'm all good. I'm a lean away. And that's what happens. And then you can't trust people because you feel like by trusting them means giving them power. By being vulnerable, it means that it allows them to be able to hurt you again from what you suffered as a child. So yes, her giving Dwayne Wade opportunity to be able to lead.
My heart, not my cash. And when I started to really address that, and I was like, do you want to pay whole mortgage? I thought I was about to die. I had such anxiety. Like I was crying, I was shaking. And he was like, you insisted on that.
Now let's pause it right there. She said a key word. I had such high anxiety. We talk about anxious attachment, right? But everybody suffers with anxiety. That's actually the reason why you have an attachment issue. How you deal with anxiety is actually why you have an attachment issue. Anxious people deal with anxiety by closing the gap. They are anxiously preoccupied. But then you have avoidance. Avoidance deal with anxiety and the feeling of anxiety by moving away. The way that fearful avoidance deal with anxiety is that at points they do what anxious people do and they cling, but then at other points they do what avoidance do and they push away, depending on what the situation is. So when she said she had a high level of anxiety, yeah, you did. And so when you were telling him, do you want to pay the bill and pay all of it, her biggest fear was actually being rejected in that moment. Now, he could have said no, right? And should have gone, well, that's why I'm going back to my normal place. I'm going back to base one. I ain't trusting nobody ever again. That just confirms my bias about what I believe about people. They will let you down. The moment I became vulnerable, the moment I asked for what I asked for, I got rejected. But here's the thing. Rejection always happens. Human beings are going to reject things. They're not going to always accept it. Just because you came out and became vulnerable doesn't mean the person's going to accept you. But it is a beginning plus, because for her to voice that opinion and voice that feeling, for her to go beyond the constructs of her fear and be courageous and brave in that moment, that's where the healing begins to start. And so in that space, she now has opened herself up for vulnerability, and now Dwayne can kind of now come and cover her. Okay?
Like, I thought it made you feel better. I'm like, it did. And right now I want to take it back. Now it sounds crazy to be like, you, Mr. NBA superstar who made a bazillion more amount of money than I do, can pay the mortgage because.
Now, why did it sound crazy at the time? The reason why it sounded crazy at the time is because, sis, you were unhealed at that point. And because you saw through your broken lens, you thought you were normal in your responses. It had become a part of you. It's your normal nervous system working itself. So it seems normal until you get healing and you find what? Balance. And that's what we do in our coaching. When I'm coaching clients, I'm trying to get them to a place of balance. When you get to that place of balance, you see the world completely differently. When you, for her situation, right? She said, it sounds crazy now, even thinking about it. He earned so much more money. Yeah, he did. That's the trauma response telling you, I don't need nobody, right? I don't need this. I don't need you to help me. I'm all good by myself. It doesn't allow for collaboration and people to be involved to help you. That's the difficult part of it.
I hate the feeling of releasing that to someone, and you release that to someone, chaos can happen. And it's brought us closer because he knows it's not about whether he can afford it. It's being vulnerable enough to be open enough to know that I'm okay. I'm okay.
And I'll end on this particular point as well. Like, vulnerability is a very important thing. We spoke about this this Monday gone past, right? We spoke about vulnerability and how men respond to women's vulnerability. They love it, okay? Because it allows us to be in our provider role and also our protection role, right? When women are being vulnerable, it's like a baby it's like a baby. You naturally feel an inclination to protect that child because of their innocence, the naivety, and the fact that they are vulnerable. And in the same measure, men want to cover women. Good men, anyway. The ones that are rubbish don't want to do anything. But the good men want to cover you. The ones that love you want to cover you. They want to play that provider role. They want to play that protector role. You've got to allow them to have that space to do so, right? Your lack of trust will remove all power from him. Your lack of trust of his leadership and his ability to cover you will strip him of the power he has. It's like kryptonite to Superman. So, for those of you who are struggling with attachment issues and you're seeing yourself in Gabrielle Union, this is a great time to reach out to me. I've still got some spaces open. Book yourself in because we need to get some work done. Okay, 2025 is a year of growth, healing, and transformation. We are not going to be the same by the end of 2025. I can promise you that. Okay, all right, and I can promise you speed in your healing as well going forward. Much love, much appreciation. We'll see you again very, very soon.